I learned the truth in the kind of moment that should have felt ordinary, the kind where nothing dramatic happens, no raised voices, no slamming doors. Just a sentence dropped into the room like a stone, slipping beneath the surface of a still lake. Quiet, but heavy enough to change the entire shape of the water. That is how it always works in my family. The worst things arrive gently, as if softness can disguise the damage. If anything, the softness makes it cut deeper. My name is Mara, and I was 25 the afternoon my father told me he had emptied my college fund. He said it while peeling an orange at the kitchen counter, sunlight pouring through the window and catching in the gray strands near his temple. My sister, glowing with her newly engaged excitement, sat at the table flipping through bridal magazines. My mother hovered by the sink pretending to rinse a cup that had already been cleaned for several minutes. No one looked at me at first. It felt almost rehearsed, the choreography of their avoidance. Then he said it, that he had used the money I had spent years saving and planning around, that the account meant for my graduate program had gone toward my sister's dream wedding. He said it as though it were the most reasonable thing in the world, a family investment, he called it, a contribution to a fresh start. And then the part that settled inside me like ice. You are smart, sweetheart. You will figure something out. My sister glanced up only long enough to flash a bright smile before returning to a page detailing flower arrangements. My mother kept her eyes on the running water. My father popped an orange slice into his mouth, as if the conversation had already reached its natural end. There was a moment, a breath long and fragile, where I expected someone to look at me, to acknowledge what had just happened, to treat me like a daughter whose life had been rearranged without warning. But the kitchen remained warm and bright, the air too light for the weight in my chest. So I did the only thing that made sense in a house where my feelings had never been an event. I thanked him, calmly, gently, as if he had handed me an inconvenient bill instead of quietly stealing my future. He nodded, relieved, pleased even, that I had not made it difficult. My mother finally turned off the faucet, drying her hands on a towel without meeting my eyes. My sister asked if peonies were too old-fashioned. No one seemed to notice that I was still standing there, too still, too quiet. Inside me, something long dormant shifted. Not anger, not shock. A precise stillness, one I recognized the same way you recognize a familiar scent after years apart. It was the feeling of understanding a truth you should have seen sooner. I had always been the reliable one, the spare child who never asked for anything, the background figure who filled in the spaces between my siblings' celebrations. Of course they assumed I would simply adjust, as I always had. I walked to my room with slow, deliberate steps. On my desk lay the acceptance letter to the graduate program I had dreamed about for years. I traced my fingers along the embossed crest, remembering how proud I had been when it arrived. Now it looked like a relic from another lifetime, a life I would not be living. I folded the letter gently and placed it in a drawer. Then I opened my laptop, not to argue, not to plead, not even to cry. I began researching work opportunities abroad, temporary housing options, seasonal jobs, volunteer programs, anything that might create a path away from the house where I had spent my entire life being the afterthought. I moved quietly, methodically, exactly the way they had trained me to exist. I started selling small belongings online, books, a lamp, winter boots. I took long walks at night, thinking through logistics, calculating timelines. No one noticed, no one asked why. They had taken my future as if it were nothing, so I would build another one they could never touch. By the end of the week, a suitcase rested open on my bed, half packed and waiting. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment, feeling the promise gather inside me like a rising tide. One day they would understand exactly what they had thrown away. I slipped out of my old life the same way I had lived in it, quietly and without drawing attention. There was no dramatic exit, no slammed door, no long speech about betrayal. I left before sunrise on a warm spring morning with a backpack, a suitcase, and a calmness that felt strange and powerful. The bus station was nearly empty as I boarded, and for the first time in years, no one expected anything from me. I sat by the window watching the town shrink behind me, the familiar houses fading into fields, the fields into open roads. With every passing mile, I felt a little lighter, as if the version of me they had known was dissolving into the distance. My first stop was a small seaside town that smelled of salt and warm bread. I found work at a bed and breakfast run by a retired couple who valued competence more than chatter. I cleaned rooms, checked in guests, carried luggage, and learned the rhythm of a place sustained by tides and tourists. It was simple work, but it taught me how to move with purpose, how to solve problems without waiting for instruction, how to speak to strangers with confidence instead of apology. In the evenings, I walked along the shore, collecting bits of sea glass and letting the wind scour the last traces of home from my skin. When the summer ended, I traveled inland and took a remote job doing data entry for a tiny online business run by a bachelor who lived in a cabin and preferred email to conversation. The work was repetitive, but it paid enough to cover my room in a shared hostel and gave me time to enroll in a course on digital operations. I studied at night while travelers from everywhere drifted in and out of the common area, exchanging stories about mountains, climbed, and cities explored. They asked about me too, and for the first time I told pieces of my truth without feeling small. No one looked at me as if I were oversensitive or dramatic. They simply listened, nodded, and told me their own histories in return. I began collecting skills the way others collect souvenirs. Website maintenance from a graphic designer who had been living out of a backpack for years. Inventory management from a Canadian woman running a handmade jewelry brand. Basic coding from a tech student on a gap year. People saw ability in me that my family had dismissed for so long it had felt like fact. I learned quickly, hungry for knowledge in a way I had never allowed myself to be. My ambition, once tucked away to keep peace in a house that had no space for it, expanded like lungs taking their first full breath. Messages from home came sporadically at first. My sister sent cheerful updates about the wedding plans, photos of dresses, centerpieces, and cake tastings. Then her tone shifted to puzzled questions about where I was and when I would be back. Eventually, impatience crept in, then worry. My mother sent short notes asking if I was eating enough. My father sent exactly one message, a curt hope that I was making wise decisions. I opened it, read it once, and closed it without replying. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Their concern came too late to matter. As the months passed, my portfolio grew. I built mock systems, streamlined imaginary workflows, and took on small freelance tasks that taught me how businesses truly operated behind the scenes. My instructors praised my work ethic. Travelers admired my discipline. I felt myself sharpening, focusing, becoming someone I had never been allowed to be under my parents' roof. Almost a year had passed when I received the email that changed everything. A rising tech company had seen the freelance projects I had contributed to and wanted to speak with me about a potential leadership role. They wrote about initiative, adaptability, and creativity, the very qualities my parents had overlooked for years. I stared at the screen, heart steady, mind clear. I was not ready to go back yet, but soon they would hear my name again. And this time it would come from someone who actually understood my worth. My first week at the new company felt like stepping into a world I had secretly prepared for my entire life, without realizing it. Everything moved fast, decisions carried weight, and ideas mattered more than seniority. Instead of shrinking back like I used to, I found myself leaning forward, offering solutions, speaking with a confidence that surprised even me. Maybe it should not have been surprising. I had spent a year sharpening myself in silence, and now every part of me felt sharper than anyone expected. I arrived early, stayed late, studied internal systems until I understood them better than people who had been there for years. Within weeks, colleagues started coming to me with questions they once directed to managers. I solved problems no one else wanted to touch. I designed processes that saved time, money, and entire projects from collapse. I felt something ignite inside me, something fierce and focused. My supervisor, a man named Rylan, pulled me aside one afternoon and told me my work was being discussed in executive meetings. He said it with a smile, the kind that hinted he knew I was only getting started. I built connections across departments, then across state lines, then across continents as our expansion accelerated. People from teams I had never met added me to project calls because someone had whispered that I could make things run smoothly. I became indispensable so quickly that even I had to pause sometimes and catch my breath. Every step forward made the ghost of my old life fade further behind me. Meanwhile, my family's life went on without me, exactly as I expected. My sister's wedding exploded across social media in a flood of photos that looked like they belonged in a luxury advertisement. Rows of white roses, crystal chandeliers, silk table settings, all purchased with the money that was supposed to build my future. My father stood in several photos, clutching a glass of champagne, smiling in a way that suggested he believed he had done something noble. In one interview posted by the photographer, he even called it a gift from the family, speaking as though the family existed without me inside it. I saw the pictures by accident while researching an event venue for a client. I anticipated a pang of anger or grief, but all I felt was distance, like looking at strangers performing a life I had already left. The pressure around me tightened when my company announced it was expanding into my hometown's market. Suddenly, my name appeared on internal documents sent across the industry, outlining the operations plan I had created. I did not think much of it until my sister somehow saw it in a corporate press release online. The messages erupted immediately. First confusion, then worry, then disbelief. How long have you been doing this? Why did you not tell us? Did you move up here? Mom is freaking out. Please call. Then my mother's messages arrived in a frantic cluster, each one more desperate than the last, begging me to come home or at least respond. My father waited 3 days before sending a single line that admitted they might have made a mistake. I read the messages once and closed my phone. None of them had asked what I wanted the year before. None of them had paused before sacrificing my future for my sister's dream party. Their panic was not my responsibility. Instead, I used my evenings to gather financial records I had saved, statements from the drained college account, screenshots of transactions my father probably assumed I would never notice. I pulled old documents from email archives and pieced together the timeline of their choices. Then I began drafting something precise, professional and undeniable. It was not anger. It was truth sharpened into a blade, but I did not send it. Not yet. Damage is most effective when delivered at the perfect moment, and that moment had not arrived. It was close, though. I could feel it. The month my company finalized the expansion plan, I received instructions to travel home as part of the leadership team overseeing the rollout. I stared at the itinerary, sensing the shift in my life folding into place. I was not returning as the quiet daughter they had dismissed. I was returning under a company banner that carried weight, influence, and my name printed clearly at the top. This time, they would not be able to look away. I arrived back in my hometown on a crisp morning that felt nothing like the ones I remembered. The air was the same, the skyline unchanged, the streets as familiar as ever, but I no longer belonged to any of it. I stepped out of the car provided by my company and walked into the hotel lobby as a representative of a rising tech firm, not as the daughter who once tiptoed through these same streets trying not to cause trouble. My badge carried my title, my responsibilities, and the weight of every skill I had earned during the year I vanished. I checked in under my professional name, the one my family never used, and felt the first hint of satisfaction settle under my ribs. I did not tell them I was coming. There was no reason to. My purpose here was business. That was what I told myself, even though I knew part of me had been waiting for this return since the day I left. Our expansion required negotiations with local business leaders, outreach to community partners, and meetings with government officials who wanted to understand how our presence would affect their region. My schedule filled instantly, back-to-back appointments, working lunches, evening debriefs. My face appeared in local press releases and online articles announcing the initiative. I knew the whispers would start the moment those stories circulated, and they did. By the second day, the hotel called to inform me I had visitors in the lobby. I walked downstairs to find my mother in an armchair, clutching her bag like it was the only thing holding her together. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy, and when she stood, she began crying so loudly I felt the entire room shift. My father stood behind her, looking smaller than I had ever seen him, pale and stiff, as if he had rehearsed apologies, but no longer remembered the words. My sister hovered a few feet away, hair unbrushed, expression wild in a way I had never seen on her carefully curated face. I did not hug any of them. I sat down and waited for them to speak. My mother went first, A rush of words, begging me to come home, to talk, to forgive, to understand. She told me they had been terrified, distraught, unable to sleep. She said they knew they had been wrong and wished they could undo the past. My father cleared his throat and attempted a calmer explanation, something about misunderstanding, about thinking they had more time, about assuming I would speak up if I needed the money. It was impressive how he managed to sound guilty and defensive at the same time. My sister interrupted them both to say her marriage was crumbling and she needed advice. Maybe help, maybe support, maybe something she could not name but expected me to provide. I listened quietly, letting their words fill the space without touching me. When they finally asked if I could help financially, I felt the last remnants of sympathy fall away. They had taken my entire future and expected me to fix theirs. I told them I would think about everything they said. Nothing more. They left looking hopeful, which told me they still did not understand who I had become. Over the next several days, I moved through my work with smooth efficiency. Meetings with government officials went well. Business leaders shook my hand with respect, and people asked for my expertise in ways my family never had. Each interaction tightened the contrast between who I was here and who I had been at home. At night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I gathered final evidence, bank records, statements, screenshots, dates, and numbers that documented exactly how my father had drained the college account. I opened a spreadsheet and began itemizing everything: the stolen amount, the projected growth if it had been left untouched, the interest accumulated over the years. Then I created an invoice, cold, factual, professionally formatted, a dollar figure placed at the bottom like a verdict. I attached a formal deadline. I printed the entire packet and slid it into a thick envelope. I held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It was not revenge for revenge's sake. It was truth, finally given shape. When the sun set that evening, I left the hotel and began walking toward my parents' house. Streetlights flickered on one by one as I moved through the neighborhood that had shaped me and abandoned me in equal measure. The envelope was tucked under my arm. The entire year had been building to this moment. The house felt smaller than I remembered when I stepped inside, as if the walls had crept closer together in my absence. My mother had set the table even though I had not asked her to, and she fluttered around the kitchen, touching dishes she did not need to touch. My father sat stiffly at the head of the table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles looked bloodless. My sister hovered near the doorway like she was deciding whether to stay or run. I took my seat without waiting for them to offer one and placed the envelope beside my plate. No one spoke at first. It was astonishing how quiet a place filled with so many excuses could become. My mother tried to begin gently, the same way she always tried to smooth disasters into misunderstandings. She asked if I wanted tea, asked if I had been eating properly, asked if my hotel room was comfortable. Her voice shook on every word. My father watched me like I had arrived holding a weapon. Maybe in a way I had. My sister kept staring at the envelope as if it might open by itself and reveal what they all feared. I let them talk until their words dissolved into the air between us. Then I folded my hands in front of me and explained why I was there. I told them calmly, without raising my voice, without shaking, without apologizing for the weight of the truth. I outlined the years I had spent saving for my education, the scholarships I had pursued, the sacrifices I had made because I believed the future waiting for me was secure. I reminded them that I had trusted them to protect what I had earned. My father tried to speak, but I held up a hand and he fell silent. For the first time in my life, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, I slid the envelope across the table toward him. The paper made a soft sound against the wood, quiet enough that it seemed to echo. He stared at it for several seconds before finally picking it up. He pulled out the invoice and unfolded it slowly. I watched his face drain of color as he studied the numbers, the dates, the documentation. It was all there in neat lines that could not be argued with or explained away. My mother covered her mouth with her hand as tears spilled down her cheeks. My sister looked between us as if she had wandered into a story she no longer understood. I told them I did not need the money. I told them I had rebuilt my life without their help, that I had carved out a future far larger than the one they had taken from me. But the payment was not optional. They would repay it because they needed to understand that choices have consequences, even when made quietly, even when made under the disguise of good intentions. My father whispered something about wanting to do right by my sister, about believing I would manage on my own. I answered that I had managed, but not because of them. Because of me. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled mine back. My sister tried to apologize in a soft, cracking voice, but I could not offer her comfort. They had all made their choices. I had made mine. I told them I no longer required anything from them. Not their approval, not their concern, not their presence in the life I had built. They had defined me as the reliable one, the quiet one, the girl who would always understand. They had been wrong. I had outgrown the version of myself they depended on. I stood up. None of them moved. My father clutched the invoice like it might dissolve if he let go. My mother sobbed into her napkin. My sister watched me with hollow eyes. I walked toward the door without looking back, leaving the envelope and the wreckage behind. When the door shut behind me, it felt like the final note of a song that had taken far too long to end. Outside, the air was cold and steady, the kind that wakes every nerve in your body. I breathed it in and felt the weight of the past year settle into something solid. Betrayal has a way of cracking a person open. The pieces fall, scatter, and then rearrange into something new, something stronger. People underestimate daughters all the time, believing silence means weakness, believing reliability means lack of ambition. But daughters learn. They learn to stand, to walk away, to build futures that no longer hinge on being seen or valued by the people who once held their worlds in their hands. Sometimes being cast aside is the beginning of becoming unforgettable.